just a quick summary of where we are. The first session and the session right now are both about the Old Testament. And what I did mention at the end of the first session was we dealt with only what is natural natural history, or normal natural history, not the supernatural history. But in terms of ideas we covered, what we said was the United Kingdom. Praise the Lord, praise the Lord. What we said was the divided monarchy. So Iron Age, towards the start of Iron Age, plus about 200 years, 150 years. We start from there and go to the time of Jesus Christ. We said we find plenty of archaeological artifacts for all sorts of things. But in terms of introducing challenges, what we said was, based on an assumption, people were looking at artifacts for the conquest of Jericho and also the Israel in the nation in Egypt and Exodus and so on, at time periods where they really couldn't find anything. And therefore, essentially, slowly but surely, people have been trying to remove one stone at a time from the historical credibility of the Bible sort of foundation. That's the massive challenge we're facing, but through God's grace, let's see if that's a surmountable challenge or not. Okay, now, so in this session, what I'm going to do is essentially start from where we started from last session and then work backwards. So the idea, the mindset roughly is, we know this is certainly true, but let's trace back to see how much of other things can we actually find to be reasonably true and so on, and then say, well, what do we say about the Bible, sort of thing. So that's the sort of approach. First session we went forward in time. This session we're going to go backward, beginning from the beginning of Iron Age, plus 100 years, going backward. So that's the rough idea, and we'll go all the way back, not to creation, of course, because I said earlier that science-related arguments we're going to cover in a different module. So we go only as far as roughly the beginning of Genesis, including the patriarchs, Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac, and yeah, that's the rough idea. Yeah, cool. Okay, so with that having said, I'm also hoping towards the end of this session, like earlier, we'll also have a 15-minute sort of questions session. But apart from that, towards the end of the session, I'd also like to give a list of arguments as to why I personally consider that biblical account should be considered as a credible account. Give a list of arguments. I think that's an area where I think we could do multiple PhDs sort of thing. I think. Anyway, so that's something we do towards the end. Okay. So the title for this session, of course, is Facing Up to the Challenges. How do we deal with the challenges? Do we run and hide away somewhere, or do we face it head on and try and ask relevant questions and see where we go from there? Okay. Firstly, let's fix the anchors properly. What is not a controversy? Let's settle those things properly. And that's where we're going to around 1000 BC again. The beginning point of the monarchy. So if we go there, which is so I said around 1000 BC, but let's say we're going to go to three crucial sources which we already looked at briefly, but I'd like to reiterate those just to trace back from there. 9th century tell dynasty late from Hazael, the king in Syria. Yeah, that's tell dynasty late. And what does he say? He clearly talks about David, and in the context of what he's saying, clearly David is identified as a king popular enough for even Syria to call a king after him as someone who's of the house of David. So we need to, there's no argument about that. So around 9th century BC, mid 9th century, that's settled, no argument. Similarly, Mesha Stele, we said from Moab, and we said Omri, king of Israel, Israel as a nation, and Yahweh. In the context of what's happening, of course, that's northern nation Israel, not the United Kingdom of Israel, not the northern Israel. And God, Yahweh. This nation having Yahweh as God. That's verified through a random, not random, so someone who is not of Israel and so has no incentive to talk about this Yahweh necessarily here. As a matter of fact, this is a God of an enemy. And so that adds credibility to the account. So that we appreciated in the last session, and I'd like to just reiterate that. 9th century BC, another thing that we saw, Kutmullah, Shalmaneser III, Israel, mentioned again. So from 9th century, we find 3 different sources from 3 entirely different kingdoms. This is from Assyria, the previous one is from Moab, and the first one was from Syria. 3 completely different kingdoms, essentially giving similar sort of attestation. So here, of course, the nation of Israel and Ahab being a king in the nation of Israel. Add to that, from that time, from around 1000 BC, there's more information on the link there. Essentially what we find is, we find pottery pieces, small pieces of, a small piece of pot, from around the time of David, having the name Goliath, and this is in the Philistine land, so having the name of Goliath. Now, how often is that name used in the Philistine area these days? How often in the centuries after that? These are questions we need to ask. In that context, to find that particular name around this time is certainly very, very important to note. So that's 9th century. And now I'd like to introduce from Egypt, Merneptah Stele, which is also called Israel Stele, from late 13th century BC. So taking us back by a few centuries before that. What does that say? Lines, so of course it's a massive stele, as you can see, plenty of lines there. And so my focus is on lines 26 to 28. What does that say? The princes are prostrate, saying peace. No one is raising his head among the 9 bows. Now that Tehenno, Libya, has come to ruin, Hatti is pacified, and Canaan has been plundered into every sort of woe. Ashkelon has been overcome. Gezer has been captured. Enom is made non-existent. Israel is laid waste, and his seed is not. This is from the 13th century BC. More, add to this another important point. Of course, Egyptians here is hieroglyphics, pictorial representations of words. And one of the things that they have done in the past is they, interestingly, you see terms like Gezer, Ashkelon, Enom, Hatti, Tehenno, Libya, and of course Israel and Peru. The point is, between those, they differentiate between what are cities, i.e. people with a land, versus what are just people groups. And here, Ashkelon, Gezer are cities, named, they are viewed as cities, i.e. of course people in a city. It's pretty much like England, the people who are English, land of people who are English, not necessarily these days, but historically, the reason for the name. But unlike that, the name Israel actually is seen here only as a people group, not with a land. Very important to note. Only as a people group, not with a land. But Israel is seen as a large enough people group for Merneptah, who is a very prominent pharaoh, not the prominent, but a reasonably prominent pharaoh, to mention by name and be concerned about his seed even. I mean, who cares if some town dignitary can't come and fight against you. Who cares? But why is Manasseh caring about this Israel, even though they don't have a land for themselves? Because they are huge enough as a people group, but not with a settled land. Fits very well during the time of the judges and so on. Here's where, just quickly, I'd like to talk about this, which is, I don't know how many get this idea when we read through scriptures. Essentially, the point is, before King Saul became king, what did the nation of Israel cry out to God for? They said, well, of course God was their king, but they said, we need a king like others. That's what they said. If people want to come and fight against us, we want an army, we want a standing army. We want the pomp of a king who is here, so everyone would be threatened looking at us and so on. Which implies that they didn't have that until the time of Saul. If you imagine, how was the nation of Israel in terms of dynamics? Well, if you have an issue, who do you go to? Samuel. Who is he? Was he someone who will be sitting on a throne somewhere? No, he'll be your next door neighbor somewhere. He is a prophet. He's a mighty man, spiritually, but in terms of material things, he will just be your next door neighbor. That's the kind of leadership they had. And fast forward back, before Samuel's time, judges. Think about all sorts of different judges. The repeating theme in those things would be, God would just choose one or maybe two in some situations, but mainly one at any particular period in time. And he'll motivate him, either come and speak to him directly, motivate him, do whatever, and then through him, and through with maybe 100 more people, or maybe 10 more people at times, but maverick guys. They are like, you know, like if you've seen, what's that movie, Braveheart. It's like William, what's his name, William?
Bruce.
What's the Scottish leader? Anyway, Robert Bruce. This is a historical name. Yeah, but if you imagine if you imagine the scene where they come down from the thick of the wood and all sorts of random clothing and stuff and all sorts of. I think the only thing in common they had was the huge stick which they had sharpened. Everything else was all over the place. That sort of thing, minus the number. They at least had maybe a few thousand for those scenes. But if you consider the period of Judges, we talk about literally tens, a few tens, maybe a couple hundreds. Imagine that. That is not your typical kingdom. It's not like President Trump say, oh, the army is going. No. It's just a few people say, oh, can we go and fight? Okay, let's go. Roughly. Of course, that's what happened. God motivated them, God strengthened them, and all these things. But the point is, Israel spent, I think a few decades at least, in that sort of phase during the Judges period, and also during Samuel and so on, where that was how the country was. No one would be able to say, this is our king, this is our leader. If enemy comes, this is how we fight. There will be no organized plan, nothing of that sort. It will be very, what might appear to be chaotic, disorganized. The only organization, the only thing which is the much needed thing which they had was God. God was their king. And therefore everything was in control. There was no problem whatsoever. And so he could just ask someone not to grow his hair, and using his strength could wipe out enemies if he wanted to. That's what he did. And that is the representation we find here. As a people group large enough but with no land is what we find here. Balaam inscription. I don't know if you're familiar with Balaam. Of course, in the New Testament you find Balaam. In the book of Revelation, you find some detail about how, out of the 7 churches, one particular church had Balaam as their model in terms of some people who were inside. Who is Balaam? Balaam was a foreigner during the time of the Exodus. Moses, Joshua, during that time, Balaam was a foreigner, but he knew God. He knew Yahweh God. So he could speak to Yahweh, and he's a true prophet in that regard. He can hear from Yahweh, and Yahweh spoke to him. But the thing is, for money, he had some nice plans. Israel was coming in as a nation trying to capture Canaan. Balak, who is a king of Moab, if I remember correctly, wanted Balaam to curse the nation of Israel for money. He's getting paid to curse. Now Balaam tried his tricks. He didn't curse because God prevented him from cursing and so on. So a few different things happened like that. Finally, he employed a very, very cunning plan where he really used some. He used sexual attraction. He used some women to essentially make the men of Israel commit sexual adultery with the nation of I don't know what to name the group unless I finalize this. I've forgotten now, but I think it's Ammon and Moab together. But take it with a lump of salt. So that's what he did. Once Israel has committed sexual immorality, now the assumption was God will remove his protection because now they are wicked and therefore he can go and curse. And that's what he was planning. But the crucial thing is, we find there's information in this link. We have an artifact which actually mentions him by name. One particular guy, Balaam son of Beor, is how he is identified. And normally when we see expressions like this, by the way, in the Old Testament, when it says Balaam the Elamite or some such thing, we need to suddenly tune in our ears, because the thing is, when it uses some special expressions, it means that was an expression which was popularly used during their trying to precisely identify who it was talking about. In other words, it's supposed to reasonably, uniquely identify. So similarly in the New Testament, when we see something like Simon Peter, Judas, who is not Iscariot, it actually means that particular Judas was clearly identified just as not the Iscariot Judas. That's how things happen. Similarly, son of Beor, that's how we see, and that's what we see here. Shashu, so that's very, very important, taking us back again during the time of the Exodus and the beginning of conquest. Shashu of Yahweh. There is another, the couple of Egyptian texts which actually uses this expression, Shashu of Yahweh. A couple of Egyptian texts, one is actually a copy of the other. And essentially, if you read that, the texts actually go on to talk about 6 different Sashus, who are called Sashus. And historically, based on analysis, it has been understood that these Sashus are nomadic people groups. Except one of them is Shashu of Yahweh. So who are these nomadic people groups whose unique identification is that they are called after their God, Yahweh? So that's another, again, a people group large enough to be reckoned with, but not with land, and clearly recognized as people of Yahweh or as of Israel's descendants and so on. Nomadic in this particular regard, on top of the previous ones. Here specifically nomadic, and that's actually Shashu. Few different nomadic groups, and one of which is the Shashu of Yahweh. So now let's try and sort of summarize those 2 or 3 things that we have found there. Merneptah and Shashu of Yahweh particularly, those 2. What we are talking about is clearly, if we fast forward a couple of centuries after this, they are no longer seen as nomads, clearly. They are seen as a proper kingdom, with proper kings, with families of kings being clearly identified. But go back only a couple of centuries, they are a completely different group. In what regard? In terms of dynamics, not in terms of who they are, but in terms of dynamics. Completely different in that they are clearly identified as nomads and clearly identified as that of Yahweh. And so that very well matches with the biblical mindset of things happen. Now let's begin doing a minor analysis on Jericho. What kind of place is Jericho? Now, historically, like I said earlier, I don't know precisely when the origin of that city is. I haven't looked into that level of detail. It could be one of the first few cities in the world, First few, I'm not saying the first few. But when precisely, I don't know. But what I do know is that it has been there for centuries, and by the time of even early Bronze Age, it was a proper walled city. You know, like it's like how do you say? I mean, how many would dare? You could be a maverick guy, but how many of us would dare? 100 people together would say, "I'm going to fight against the US with my little whatever I have." People don't do. That sort of city was Jericho, well walled, proper in terms of political structure, proper in terms of the military structure in place. That we do know. And what we also do know is around the 15th century, in the time period we are talking about, which is the Bronze Age and the Iron Age combined together, around the 15th century was when it was destroyed last, after which it had about 600 years of being nothing apart from one or two, I think just one house, which is called a mill house, I think. And after that, 600 years later, it was built again, but the wall was never built again. The city was not the wall. In other words, if you want to go back to the wall that we care about, around 1500 BC was the last time archaeologically. Remember earlier I said, Bible clearly says Solomon built his temple around 480 years after the construction of the after the Exodus. Solomon was about 1050 BC around. Move back 480. You're looking at that sort of time period. Not Ramesses the second in the late 13th century. That's clearly wrong. That's the kind of time, and things already beginning to take shape. That's the kind of time we care about, and that's when it was last destroyed. And there are some specific points which archaeologists are laying out for us. The city was the wall. When I say city here, city including the wall. The city with the wall was last destroyed 15th century BC, destroyed by fire. Joshua had a command to destroy every city that he captures by fire. You're not supposed to reuse cities. Again, Islam goes wrong. One of the things, maybe I should keep this away from someone, but the Yahweh of the Bible is very clearly polar opposite from the Islamic Allah of the Quran. And one of those bases is, you are never, whoever I am judging and choosing to wipe out because of their wickedness, you're not supposed to even reuse what they have. Because if you attempt to, then you might learn their practice. Don't do it. And so destruction by fire was expected out of Joshua, and that's exactly what had happened to Jericho. Fortification walls had collapsed, but not showing signs of an external attack. The walls didn't, so the external attack was clearly not the reason why the wall collapsed. So the question we need to ask is, of course, it matches with the biblical view, because Joshua, even though he captured the city, he didn't attack the city. All he did was go around singing songs with the rest of the nation. And so clearly, however the wall collapsed, if it collapses in the wrong way, that's really good for the biblical account. And that's what we find. Destruction happened in spring because we find grain storage, again matching with what we find in Joshua account, because Joshua account tells roughly around this time is when Joshua attacked. Israel had to go around the city of Jericho. Grain stored in the city was not consumed. If it was a long siege, 5 months, enemies waiting around, we will finish off all your food. But the food was still there. And so clearly it was a very, very swift attack, but not a conventional attack in the way we find in the walls. And then the grain wasn't used by the invaders also. Why would they, if they are coming out? Of course they are not natives. They are people who are from elsewhere who are coming to fight. Why would they not take the food? They haven't taken the food. Why is that? Biblical account clarifies. You're not supposed to wipe it out. Nothing to be reused. Not alone that, there are other archaeologists who are actually saying, if you take the book of Joshua, remarkable Genesis, of course we might learn the books of Genesis, all the books in the Bible in multiple iterations. So initially we might grapple with some of the ideas, later on some other ideas, The point is, at some stage what you begin seeing, or even once you sort of a bit clued up in terms of archaeology, you also begin seeing groups of list of names of cities when they show up, as if it's a treasure trove, because you can reconstruct history based on that. So what we find is, archaeologists are finding that out of all these city-states in the nation of, in the land area called Canaan, the cities that Joshua attacked and captured are those which are actually seeing the sudden disruption. They are destroyed, and then they aren't inhabited for a long time after that. That is clearly seen in the city-states that Joshua destroys. A list of which is given in, for example, Joshua chapter 10 and so on. There are multiple battles and stuff mentioned, and they mention about Hatzor and a few other towns and so on mentioned. Whenever you see the names there, you find discontinuity in the archaeological records. And there are other city-states which are in Canaan which do not show a similar discontinuity. In other words, remember I showed you a quote from Israel, Finkelstein, where I said, oh, what we see are just normal urban and then rural and then urban sort of cycle. We don't find that. Specifically with the names that the Bible gives, you find that disruption, not with the others. Add to that one more thing. What does normal urban, rural, urban cycle mean? So we are a city now. Are we going to suddenly wake up one day and say, you know what, enough of being a city, let's wipe out everything and then let's just be nomads. Let's just do agriculture. How many have done that in the past? What does he mean when he says normal, as if it's usual? It doesn't happen anywhere. There's only one reason why such a thing would happen, and that's where you simply can't live here anymore. And that's either when an enemy attacks, or maybe there's famine or stuff like that. That's when you abandon existing, well-established structures and then go to what is necessary pastoral structure. So in other words, here, I don't know where Israel Finkelstein gets some of his terms. Maybe he's so engrossed in his ideas that he doesn't even think twice about what he's saying. There's no such normal cycle involved anywhere. Anywhere where there is urban back to rural lives, what you find is someone seems to have done something to the existing lifestyle. They abruptly change things. Okay, on top of that, maybe I'll go to Amana tablets first. Hapiru, as a people of conquest. So Amana is in Egypt. Amana tablets are really tablets, clay tablets, letters written, letters of communication between pharaohs and people who were related to pharaohs. In this case, this particular document actually comes from a letter, a clay tablet written by someone in Canaan who was writing to a pharaoh. You can get information on that here. I think even a picture of that. The point is there in that particular, in one of the particular tablets, tablets in the list of Amana tablets, what we find is a people group again called Hapiru. Hapiru, who are a people of conquest. If you think about Hapiru, the thing that comes to your mind is they are going around fighting. And Hapiru is normally understood to be Hebrew. Who were the nation of Israel when they came out? So Hebrew was the term, was used as a dynamically interchangeable term with the nation of Israel. If you read the book of Exodus, even though the term Hebrew has a slightly wider connotation, what does it really mean is still up to a bit of question. One possible explanation is it's really people who crossed over. So people who crossed over the Euphrates river to come to Canaan from Babylon, and that's why Abraham was called a Hebrew, is the idea given. But the thing is, if you go to the book of Exodus, Israel was clearly referred to as Hebrews. I think if I remember correctly, especially in the context of saying there were others also. By the way, those who God saved during Exodus wasn't just the nation of Israel. Anyone, as long as they do the Passover, have the blood, will be saved. And you find non-Hebrews also who came along with the Hebrews. So the point is, Hebrews that's a term interchangeable with the nation of, with the term Israel, especially at that time. And you find them referred to as a people of conquest. So, in terms of Jericho so far, what do we find? If only we get the Exodus synchronization differently, which we haven't done so far, yeah, we certainly find a very good candidate option for how the biblical history could match with the history as given in Joshua and Judges. Yeah, with me so far? Just one more clarification here. I think this is where I'm thinking some of these minimalist archaeologists haven't read their Bible properly, which is one of the important controversies advanced against the Bible related to this is that they say the book of Judges contradicts with the book of Joshua in terms of the mindset. For example, if you read accounts of what happened in the book of Joshua, you find Joshua had wiped out and so on. So the idea is sudden conquest, all people who are wiped out, is how they see it. All of Canaan were wiped out, it's just the nation of Israel. Sudden fighting and so on. But if you go to Judges, you will clearly see those who were supposed to have been wiped out were still around. And that's where you find Philistines, that's where you find Ammonites, Moabites, Midianites, Amalekites, and so on, still around, trying to fight with the nation of Israel. That's why Judges have to rise up and say, oh, I won't let you fight back and so on. So they see these as contradictory accounts. Whereas if you carefully read the book of Joshua and earlier books, it's very clear what is described in Judges is very clearly and expected based on the details given in the previous books. What does Moses say? All of the nations would not be wiped out. I'm leaving them behind as thorns in your flesh because you really messed up and I don't want to treat you as if you've done nothing wrong, because that will be clearly wrong. So you clearly see that, and that's why but what does the book of Joshua say? When you go through the book of Joshua, for example, I think it is here. I think it's chapter 10. When you go through chapter 10, you find narration about how Joshua fought against a few different city-states, and you find expressions like Joshua destroyed them. The way they read it is to say they are no longer there. But clearly that's not what the book of Joshua says, because if you just move to the next chapter, which is just one verse after, you'd find that Joshua still went ahead to fight against the other guys who were still around. But the previous statement said he was destroyed. So how do we read the term destroyed? Well, there are a few different ways of reading, and one very legitimate way of reading is that they were subjugated. Some of these people were subjugated, not all, and so on. You see, the point is, so to suggest that Joshua contradicts with Judges is clearly incorrect, and that idea could be arrived at only if we haven't read scriptures properly. Anyway, so summary so far, we began in the 9th century, Merneptah Stele helped us go to the 12th century, Amarna tablets is, by the way, the earliest of dating, which is the one, it's the Shashu of Yahweh. There are 2 copies. The earlier copy comes from 14th century BC, again similar time we talked about. That's when we are expecting 15th century BC is when we are expecting Israel to have gone out. So 14th century BC, of course, there have been nomads called after Yahweh. And that's what we are finding in these artifacts we have seen so far. And similarly, in the Amarna tablets, we find a similar sort of tone in relation to the nation of Israel. There's only one minor thing, just quickly, very important point, but redundant point on top of what I mentioned so far. Jabin, King Jabin is a very prominent man that time. He was king of the most prominent city-state in the land of Canaan at that time, which is Hatzor. He was the king of that, and we find details of him in the book of Judges. There's also another king, Jabin. Did I say Judges? In Joshua. In Joshua, and there's another Jabin in the book of Judges. But the one in Joshua, we find even an archaeological artifact of a letter related to him from Hatzor. So the point is, these all match up. So far, good. If only we get the Exodus thing nailed properly, then essentially we are getting all pieces together. Now, let's go to Exodus. Moses and Exodus, from fiction to fact. What do we do with Exodus? So, this is the table I showed you earlier. Late Bronze Age, around 1400 BC to 1000 BC. And I showed Jericho, and nothing here apart from one large house. New town here for 600 years, nothing. And the wall was never rebuilt. So, the wall wasn't there even in this. So that's the background. Ramesses II was when they had the sojourn earlier. Moses and Joshua and Exodus and so on. I've removed all of them. And the reason is, it seems like we have a pattern in the artifacts that we see in Exodus, in the book of Exodus, slightly earlier, and actually closer to the timeline we get from the Bible itself, which is around 500 years before Solomon's temple, which is around 1500 BC. We find evidences of Semitic, Asiatic people who thrive in the land of Egypt. Thrive enough that there were plenty of high officials from that Semitic group in Egypt. And then prospering, and then we also find evidence that they suddenly turned to be slaves. And then we find evidence that they suddenly leave Egypt. And around the time they leave Egypt, Egypt seems to be completely destroyed in all sorts of weird ways. And also, soon after the destruction, that entire dynasty comes to an end because some other Asiatic people, when I say Asiatic people, I mean people who come from not Africa, i.e. not Egypt, but rather from the Asia side, more closely related to Canaan, that sort of area. What we find is, we find an entirely new dynasty of Asiatic rulers called Hyksos. Interestingly, these people do not fight to get control. They just seem to have control, just come in and are in control. How come? And these things would really match with what Exodus is talking about. For example, by the way, very interesting also in the Egyptian history, you also have, around the end of 13th dynasty, there's a bit of hazy details related to, was Egypt a united country at that time? Or were people in the east, northeast? Was there a different sort of rule which was already entering into the northeast? So that sort of confusion exists in Egyptian history, apart from all we talked about, completely independent of the discussion about Israel. Point is, that would be a very clear setting where, remember why this Pharaoh wanted to persecute the nation of Israel? He said, we don't want them to have an upper hand, because the political situation right now doesn't really help. These are foreigners, we really need to subjugate them, otherwise we won't be out of power. That would be explained by the sort of the hazy situation which was around at that time. Now, anyway, so that's our core discussion. The question that we're going to ask is, could that possibly map onto the biblical Exodus? Is what we're going to see. And if that were, when we go with those evidences, what we find is exactly when the 13th dynasty falls, Hyksos begin to rule, the large Asiatic group, the entire large colony of Asiatic groups entirely move away like that abruptly, and around that time is exactly when Jericho wall falls. And then the rest is we already saw with Jericho, all the grain and stuff. So, very good candidate. If that is true, wonderful. Yeah? Cool. Now, so now we are going to build the case there. So we find certainly evidences in an Egyptian necropolis at Beni Hassan. We find portrayal of Semites, Semitic people, Asiatics. How do we know they are Semites? Pharaohs shave. Like I said earlier, facial features, clothing and so on. From this particular painting, you find that there are these Semites and they carry colorful clothes and stuff like that. I mean, they were matching with what we find in Genesis about the patriarchs. You know, Jacob had given wonderful colorful clothing to Joseph and so on. So all that kind of cultural backdrop. We find people of that sort of cultural backdrop coming in merrily. To an extent, that is a prominent even for it to be painted in a burial site. So how many times that could have happened? So it's prominently represented. So here's where some of the material we're going to discuss right now, including the table we saw earlier, comes from a very interesting lecture given by David Rowe, and that's the link. And so I certainly recommend. Of course, in our further reading section, that will be a very important resource for us to go through. In the, I think people have been trying to make movies out of this, because Christians are really trying to bring this message out into the open, because the traditional Egyptologists aren't happy with some of these things, despite the fact that, as I could say, I'm not an Egyptologist, I'm evaluating the logic used in specific arguments, and when I see the logic, I say, well, that's very logically sound. Why don't you consider this carefully, sort of thing. So David Rowe is doing that, so anyway, for later reference. So what we find, people coming in, what we find is we find a couple of interesting pharaohs. If the table was true, if the table that I showed you earlier was true, around the time when Joseph was supposed to have come, if we trace back from that, we find a couple of interesting pharaohs who seem to be, in the way they are portrayed, it seems to be they are very miserable pharaohs. Apparently very, very stressed during their rulership time. And during their time is what we find, is the stuff that we find. Plenty of Asiatic Semites are coming in. They are getting on to high ranking in terms of official status and so on. No one seems to be fighting against them. So you find all of that pattern during this time. And he is a very, miserable pharaoh. And what we find is, there are a few interesting things, archaeological things which still survive, which are related to that period. One of which is called a canal, which is called a canal Joseph. And this is literally a canal which is built to channel water away from River Nile when it floods into a large area which is in Hawara. So it's like from a river onto a lake sort of idea. So the river doesn't harm Nile. So one of the important points that David Rowe points out too, before he pointed out, I didn't really take note of that, which is, there was famine during the time of 7 years of abundance and then 7 years of famine. Remember the dream that was interpreted in that particular way, there were animals, cows coming out of River Nile. So the point he's making is, this is not a famine because of lack of water. This is a famine with abundance of water, even to an extent of flooding. So the entire land area is flooded, so you don't have food. So if that were the case, you find the canal associated with Joseph. By the way, historically, that's actually claimed to be named after Joseph of the Bible. Historically, based on preserved name, knowledge about preserved name. And then the idea is, if that is the case, again, floodwater channel, Joseph took many steps to see how to manage this properly, one of which of course is to store food, and this is another possible thing. What we also find is, we find during this particular period is when they actually began measuring the level of water in River Nile, apparently because they were so concerned about the level of water. So we find that, and also levels are measured, of course, after that period also, and you find some of the highest points of River Nile was during their time. So you find all of that, and that's when the Semitic settlement happens. Brooklyn Papyrus is a papyrus document we get again from this particular period. This is from Egypt, and we find this is essentially this. There are a couple of papyrus, by the way, which are called Brooklyn Papyrus. This is in Brooklyn Museum. The particular one that we are talking about, the link is given there because that's not the first result that comes up if you do a normal Google search. But that's the official page where the E version of Brooklyn Papyrus is there. What we find is it gives a list of midwives, slaves who are midwives. And you find that most of them are Semitic. Most of them are Semitic in origin. So essentially it seems like midwives were plenty of people from Canaan during that time. The way we find that is through the names. Add to that a couple of other historical artifacts which give history. One of which is a Jewish historian, Antipater. And he actually names, he's a Jewish historian concerned about Jewish things of that time. So he actually names the pharaoh corresponding to Moses. And he names him as Keneferes. And that particular sort of name before you ascend to the throne is only held by two different pharaohs, only one around this time. And that is this particular pharaoh who comes exactly matching in time. If you consider them to be the pharaohs of Joseph, if you work out your dates, Exodus was supposed to be around 430 years. Exodus, the exile in Egypt, living in Egypt. From the time Jacob went in to the time Exodus began, it's supposed to be 430 years. And you'd find if you do that sort of calculation, if those were of Joseph's time, this guy would be of Moses' time. And that's who Antipater claims is the Pharaoh of Moses' time. And if that working from there going forward, if that is from Moses' time, 40 years later, around the time of Exodus, which is, of course, Moses goes on exile into Midian land and comes back and so on. What you find is the Pharaoh during Exodus is Dudimos. So far we are working based on, so far outside of this, we were working based on very high coincidences. But if you add to that this, we talked about a historical resource saying he is the Pharaoh of Moses. Now, based on that we come to Dudimos. Now come to another guy called Manetho, who is an Egyptian priest, whose work is preserved by, of course, the Jewish first century historian Josephus. Manetho goes on to claim that the time the Egyptian Pharaoh during the time, Manetho goes on to claim a Pharaoh called Tutimius was a Pharaoh when God, not gods, not Egyptian gods in plural, but one singular God, as it is uniquely identifiable as to who is being spoken about, God smote us during the time of Tutimius, which is the equivalent, which is the Egyptian equivalent of what you find there in Greek. So I'm not getting this one.
That's the Greek for the Egyptian
Dudimos, yeah, sorry. Tutimius, sorry. This is the Greek because Josephus is using, he is in the first century here already. Cool. So what have we got here so far? So we've got, if we begin with what we find in Jericho, and if we trace back, everything seems to be falling in place here. Add to that the papyrus called Ipuwer papyrus, which in my evaluation seems to be fairly neglected so far. I've given a link to where you can find the text corresponding to the English translation of the text corresponding to Ipuwer papyrus, giving you information about where you get the authentic sort of an education institution link to that. The point would be, go through Ipuwer papyrus. That seems to be, to me, talking about the 10 plagues. And there are a few other people also who are looking at it in that way. It seems to be talking about blood all over the place. It seems to be talking about slaves who have taken over. No law in the land. All the rich people seem to be sort of controlled by these poor people, and so on. So you find all the ingredients. You find some insight into some of the plagues also there. So essentially that adds credibility to all the stuff that we have seen so far. Yeah. So do you see, pretty much putting these things together, ignoring for a moment all the opposition that the other the Egyptologists are bringing in. If you put these things together, that pretty much is reconstructing the tale of Exodus and Israel in Egypt and so on. Add to that, David role. I haven't even reproduced, I think maybe 5% of what I saw in David Roll's lecture. It's about 2 hours lecture, which I really encourage all of us to watch. If you go through that, it almost seems as if the entire story of Joseph seems to be there. But when I say entire, I mean the crux, the crucial crux. You find an archaeological artifact of a house with in the Semitic area, which is in the city of Avaris, which is what is later known as Ramesses, the city where the Israelites were as slaves. And in that city, you find this particular house has tombs within house territory, 12 tombs. Only one looks like a pyramid, and pyramids are reserved for high officials in Egypt. Now, not just any high official, you need to be either the pharaoh or someone like the pharaoh to that extent. And you find a pyramid there. But then if you go get into the details of what the internals of the pyramid, it seems like it's a Semitic burial. But with the pyramid. And the rest of the 11 burial tombs are all Semitic in nature. The house the particular house is a large house, indicating it's a very, very prominent person in Egypt, but of Semitic origin. And then it was extended and was built in 2 separate stages. And in the second stage of really the extension stage, you find 2 additional quarters built into the house, as if it's built for 2 of your children. And of course Joseph has Ephraim and Manasseh, two children, and so on. And this again matches up with the time when you have Semites who are popular, and then later on they became slaves, and then later on they leave the land entirely as one group. So all of these things together match up. So that's the story so far. So we have a very, very highly credible candidate option here. What is the only thing which is preventing us is the mention of the name Ramesses. And the question of whether Ramesses is mentioned in the Bible is so Ramesses, the pharaoh called Ramesses the Great is the one we need to be concerned about. And that is where I think David Rowe gives a very, very important point in relation to the names. I don't know. I'll give you a simple example. This is my knowledge of Greek. I've been self-teaching or self-learning Greek. And one of the things I came across is the fact that V and B, I don't know if you know the V and B, what is written today with a V is actually pronounced with a B. Basilios, for example, is actually written with a V. And this kind of thing shows up in Hebrew also. the Bait, Aleph Bait is the second alphabet, but Bait is really a Bait only if you have a dot. If you don't have a dot, it's a Bait. So the B and the V are interchangeable and so on. It's similar in Spanish. B and V. So similar things. For example, I am a Tamil. In Tamil, the name, the language Tamil is actually Tamil with a U, and that is written as ZH. So the point is, there are interesting features in various languages which have interesting past. Why is it written as ZH and so on? The point is, David Rowe goes into one particular similar detail in regards to the Hebrew Vav and Kampf, which actually, based on the relationship he gives, the point he is making is the Ramesses, the Ramesses that we find in the Bible is really the Shishak we find in the Egyptian records. Remember earlier, at the start of the first session, we said Shishak was a pharaoh who attacked Jerusalem. Remember I said Rehoboam became friends with him because he took shelter with him and then came back. That seems to be the pharaoh who is Ramesses by name. So the point is, he's making some corrections there, and then based on that, essentially the point would be, if we put all of these things together and consider Ramesses to be Shishak, they all then match up, and then match up with the 480 years given in the Bible also. So everything is now in almost everything almost is now. See, there are a couple of other minor glitches here and there still, but a very important area that can be reasonably pursued. What is the only thing which has been preventing this so far? Are mindsets related to what we saw earlier, which is, well, the Bible isn't a significant source. Why do we? Egyptology, Egyptian artifacts are much more significant and so on. There, my point would be, I think this has happened even with biology and astronomy and so on in regards to creation. They are demonstrably abused, as far as I can see, in relation to the biblical account of how creation happened. Now the point would be, I see a similar pattern here also. And the point I really like to make is, how does archaeology work? How does history work? The way history works, the way archaeology works, archaeology doesn't necessarily give you a second by second coverage of what happened. You get maybe 100 artifacts which cover 100 years. You sometimes get one artifact which covers 200 years. But still the point, even if you get hundreds of artifacts covering hundreds of years, you're still left with just 100 artifacts to deal with hundreds of years. For example, if you, in the UK, of course, the prominent archaeological artifact museum, British Museum. We have other places also in the UK, Oxford Museum, Cambridge Museum, we have several other collections also. But certainly British Museum is by far the more prominent, reasonably comprehensive. But how big an area is that? It's just one large museum in a town like London. And in the entire world, how many similar museums have we got? Let's say 100, I didn't really do the counting, but let's say we have the British Museum, a Louvre Museum, in Germany there must be a couple of museums prominent, in the US of course we have the Washington Museum, a few different museums, let's say on average, let's say 10 museums per country, which are prominent. In reality, only about 15-20 countries actually have collections we care about. Because most of the artifacts are in the UK. And all the remaining are in the Louvre Museum and so on, in France, in Germany, in Turkey, in Israel, certainly in Iraq, Iran also. But the things we care about are not in all the countries in the world. We are really talking about, let's say, best case, 1 million artifacts, let's say, to cover 4,000 years, or around 3,000 years. You don't cover the entire stuff. You could have all sorts of problems, errors. You might think you are right, but you might be completely wrong. For a long time, Hittites were a people group who were spoken of only in the Bible, no one else. And people thought Bible was wrong, purely based on that. And then suddenly we uncover not just one artifact corresponding to the tiny family called Hittites, but uncover artifacts corresponding to an entire empire, the Hittite Empire, which is in modern day Turkey. The point I'm trying to make here is, we have even empires which are completely hidden from human sight for several centuries, and absolutely even in the future we might find many such artifacts. The point that I'm trying to make here is, the Bible presents a clear case for the Iron Age. The Bible goes on to present a reasonably detailed account for time prior to Iron Age, and there are extra biblical artifacts which can map or match with the Bible to a reasonable level of accuracy, except there are a couple of challenges here and there, but they still can. Now, unless someone comes and proves, no, this is wrong, goes through everything and establishes how these are wrong, they really can't discredit the Bible. All that has happened so far is, I don't care about what you're saying. I'm looking for things during Ramesses II time, which is the 18th dynasty, which is around the 13th century BC. And there I don't find, and therefore I'm going to reject. That is not a good way to do archaeology. This should certainly have credibility, should certainly be taken seriously. Now, on top of that, I'd really like to go only to Genesis, the book of Genesis, Patriarchs. How do the account of Patriarchs match up? A quick few things there. Okay. Hammurabi Code mentions a king called Amraphel. Bible mentions a king called Amraphel. And we have artifacts. This particular one is in British Museum, and related artifacts are in I think Louvre Museum in France. And that gives us a person called Hammurabi. And Amraphel etymologically is Hammurabi, as how the Jews would have, the Hebrews would have called it Hammurabi. So etymologically connected, a person of similar sort of time period, someone who is recorded in the Bible is recorded outside of the Bible. Apart from that, we find three important areas where we have plenty of clay tablets from the time of the Patriarchs, which is about 2000 BC. Mari, Nuzi and Ebla. Ebla is sort of in northern Syria, western Syria. Mari is just by Euphrates River, and Nuzi is further northeast, which is in northern Iraq. There we find plenty of interesting information. Ebla, for example, talks about Sodom, Gomorrah, Adma, Zeboim, Bela in cities in that particular order, and the Bible uses that very particular order in two different places. Why should 5 cities show up in a particular order repeatedly, both in the Bible and elsewhere? There might have been a reason. It could have been a trade route. It could have been maybe that's the most prominent of the cities, less prominent, and so on. So descending levels of prominence, or it could be geographically. If you go from Sodom to Bela, you may take this route. We don't know what precise reasons, because these cities, especially Sodom and Gomorrah, we know the background of, have been wiped out to an extent. People are saying they're really in the Dead Sea area, where we find asphalt pits and so on, as described in the Bible. So we don't find plenty of artifacts, but the fact of them listed in that particular order. And similarly, Ebla tablets give names of people, which are again names used in the Bible. Nahor, Israel, Eber, Michael, Ishmael, and so on. Names used in the Bible. Mari tablets again give names similar to names used in the Bible. Nuzi tablets give legal documents. And some of the legal aspects given here match with some of the behavior that we find in the book of Genesis. If you don't have a child with your wife, taking a slave woman as someone who can bear children on your behalf. That idea seems to be recorded in Lucy also. Slaves adopted by childless couples. When Abraham said, if I don't have a child, then my servant Eliezer would inherit all my wealth. And similarly, even the idea of why, what's her name? Rachel. Why Rachel would have stolen the household god from her father's place when Jacob and Rachel and Leah and the entire troop with them were coming to Canaan, back to Canaan from Laban's house. So information related to that, only if you have the household idol. The household idol is like your land registry certificate. So if you have that, you own the land. And so when she took that away, it means that she is taking inheritance away. And so Laban chases after Jacob and says, you shouldn't cross this. I haven't found this idol with you, but you shouldn't cross to, it almost appears as if you might have still taken the land registry, but don't ever cross and come over here to claim the land. I don't care if you take it or not, don't claim. It's an agreement that they signed. So all these principles are principles which are accurate in the historical context of that land area and time. On top of that, table of nations, which is what we mentioned about briefly earlier, brother. Genesis chapter 10 gives Genesis chapter 10 gives you sort of the origin of all the nations in the world, the old ancient people groups in the world. And one particular example, one small portion, Nimrod, mighty hunter, and it talks about him being the first guy who built a kingdom, i.e. someone who wanted prominence. Not to live as equals, but rather I am the prominent guy. And he went on to build Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Shinar, in the land of Shinar. Now the thing is, what we find is archaeologically, we find that these are very, very old cities. We find, so roughly matching with the timeline that's given. Similarly, Nineveh, Kala, Resen, and so on. Rehoboth. So all these things are also match up with the information we have during the patriarchal times. In other words, to summarize so far, what we have seen, Jericho and the conquest, Israel as a nomadic people group during this time, and then just fast forward 1 or 2 more centuries, they become a kingdom. A nomadic people group for a quite considerable period of time, but prominent enough to be recorded. Exodus, Israel in Egypt, Israel's exodus from Egypt, all of these, we have a very, very credible set of artifacts which come together to correspond to what we find in the Bible. We still have work to do, but it's a very credible case to be made. Okay, alright, just half a minute break for Brother JC to change. Just 20 seconds, 10 seconds, 5 seconds.
3, 2,
1, go.
Action.
Action, alright, cool, thank you. Okay, now that's the case that we'd like to advance. Let's see through God's grace how many people pick that up. David Rowe is picking that up and so on. So let's see how things go with that. But it's a very credible case. Now, I'd really like to make my comments about my take on what the minimalists have done. They have advanced ideas, agreed, but I like to evaluate. And so, reassessing challenges. For instance, they talk about the JEPD, documentary sources. But what evidence exists for those documents? Historically, we only have one kind of evidence, which is for the Bible to be considered as one combined list of documents. Source-wise, for example, Genesis is just written by one writer. Exodus, one writer. Together, the Torah, one writer. The nation of Israel, right through his history, that's the idea they had preserved. That's what Jesus also said and so on. The point is, that's what we have evidence for. Anything else, even for two, we must appreciate and call out the fact that it is a mythical idea, purely a figment of imagination. So it doesn't matter who advances the idea. Could be Israel Finkelstein, could be all sorts of other people. And the documentary hypothesis is not by Israel Finkelstein for the first time. It was advanced by some other archaeologists and historians. But the point is, regardless of whoever advances that, if we don't find any evidence for that, we should call that out. And the fact of the matter is, there is none whatsoever. It's all imagined. With me so far? So in other words, what we are dealing with here is a credible case versus complete myths with no shred of evidence. Documentary evidence. Documentary hypothesis. Now, moving on to the next one. Why were they looking in Egypt at the wrong period? The only reason is the name Ramesses. But we do understand and appreciate, certainly in some portions of the Bible, names were retrofitted. Let me put it this way. Please take what I'm saying extremely carefully here. Agreed, the first five books of the Torah are attributed to Moses. No doubt from a spiritual, theological perspective. But I do not think any reasonable biblical scholar would actually say that automatically implies every single statement there written was from Moses, which we obviously know is not the case. Looking at Deuteronomy, the last couple of verses, people seem to have added a little, most likely Joshua or someone after him has added a little bit of a, what is called a postscript sort of thing, to just a couple of verses there. But we also find that things were updated to reflect some other realities. For example, Moses could have written the entire stuff, barring maybe 2 verses here, 3 verses there, 1 or 2 words here and there, and names could have retrofitted. Nowhere in the Bible says all of these are written personally by Moses entirely. That's, you see what I'm saying? That's a very reasonable comment to make. But having said that, the most important point to note is theologically, scripturally, and historically, based on the history and tradition the nation of Israel has preserved, it is true that regardless of minor things that we have added here and there, the book has enough content, the books, first 5 books have enough content from Moses that they should be called after Moses. Pretty much like I write a book called after my name, but there are a few statements written by some other people there. So when I call my name there, it's not to say everything is from me, and so on. So that's the kind of idea. So in other words, we have a reasonable explanation as to why the name Ramesses could have retrofitted, could have been retrofitted to the name of the city by the time of that particular sort of compiling together what came originally from Moses. That could have been one possibility. Another possibility is, words and names and culture and so on of Egypt, we are masters on those things. We know a lot, agreed. Egypt is one of those nations about which we know a lot. Maybe apart from the biblical account, the Bible is a very, very remarkable source, very unique in the entire history of nations across the world. Apart from the Bible, if you keep the Bible away, and if you want to look for other archaeological artifacts and stuff, maybe Egypt and Egyptian artifacts would be some of the best, if not the best. So in other words, we know a lot, no doubt about that. But that is not to say we know everything. Who else was called Ramesses? Was the city called Ramesses at that time? Was it called Ramesses even before that for some other reason? How can we confidently conclude, and especially in the context of rejecting an entire literature which is reasonably credible otherwise? You see what I'm saying? This is not a simple game. This needs to be taken extremely seriously. I'll give you a simple example. I was working in a financial institution 5-6 years ago, This gives news information, financial news comes through my system, sort of in microseconds from the time it's released. And I came across this article and I thought, you know what, and it said, it gave a name of a particular state in India, and it's today called Odisha, and it said, oh, Odisha, something happened in Odisha. And I read the article and I thought, oh, no, it's not Odisha, it's supposed to be Orissa, not Odisha. And I was going to actually, in a couple of minutes, I was going to write to the journalist who gave the article, which is from a place I worked in. So I was going to write to him, say, please make this correction. It seemed to have got a mistake, maybe a typo or whatever. And then briefly, I thought, no, maybe I need to briefly check. And then I briefly checked, lo and behold, despite the fact that I follow Indian politics reasonably closely, even after having left India, what I found out was that the name of a state was changed a couple of months before that time, and I didn't know about it. For 2-3 months or so, I didn't have a clue. I thought this is a typo, but a name had legitimately changed. Names could change in that way, all over the place. So I have India in mind. I can give you 3, 5, 6 examples of names where people outside of India could still be calling those cities after the old names. But if you use those old names, the Indians would be offended because names have changed. And it's not just that, spellings of names, transliteration of names. There could be all sorts of complexities involved when it comes to names like these. And so it's a very, very shaky area to base your idea based on one name to suggest I've got this as my benchmark. To comment on the various other much more objective things, I would say is a very shaky thing, if you see what I mean. Yeah? In other words, I would say among the archaeological artifacts, some have to be certainly positioned as more objective, less controversial versus some others. And then based on that, we need to be willing to compromise on the more controversial in favor of the less controversial. And one such more controversial area is looking at a name, thinking I've got it all right. And so that's important one. And that's the important point they have. And that's a shaky ground they stand in. I'll ignore that science part. Backdated events, we already commented on that. It's a consequence, not a reason. But Israel Finkelstein goes around claiming that as if it's a reason. Okay. So biblical archaeology mindsets should be revised. This is the minimalist, maximalist, and so on. And that is a clear example of a circular argument. It's pretty much very similar to saying in the New Testament, in the Gospels, I'm going to stick only to the red letters, Y, of Jesus, in the red letter Bible, Y. And even among that, only to those which are not supernatural. If anything says Jesus did signs and wonders, I will reject that. Why? Because I think God doesn't exist. Wait a second. So you are rejecting an evidence for a historical record of people having seen an evidence of God existing. You are rejecting that. And then saying I'm rejecting that because God doesn't exist. So it's a clear circular argument. So you're rejecting all these evidences and then claiming God doesn't exist. Simply doesn't work. So I can do a similar thing. I'm going to reject every artifact related to Egypt in the world. Anything that speaks about Egypt, reject that and then claim Egypt never existed. Why can't I do that? So that mindset is applied even in regards to Old Testament, and that should clearly change. Ideas that people are advancing are clearly, completely speculative with no shred of evidence to ground it in reality. Examples of which are gradual settlements, not sudden conquests. What's the reason given? These are natural cycles. There's no natural. No fool would suddenly say, I'm going to destroy my house. I don't like it. I've lived in it for a long time. All of us are going to destroy, and then we are suddenly going to live as if we are fools. When did this happen before? So saying that these are normal things are just wrong. They are very speculative. Doesn't happen. Mythical past to satisfy. I haven't actually dwelt on that at all. Maybe I'll come to that a bit later. But I need to cover a framework that I have, maybe over the next 5 minutes or so. I'd really like to summarize a few arguments that I have put together to really use to evaluate any and every idea that people use in the future. We really need to subject claims of Israel Finkelstein and the likes of him to Hyde Park Speaker's Corner level of scrutiny. We really need to do that, which they haven't been used to. They've been in cozy circles, everyone respects that you have doctorates and so on. No one questions. Even when people question you, they question you gently. So you think you made some point, they think they've made some point. Everyone just listens to both and just changes no opinion. That's what's happening. And this is where, okay, if we try and evaluate, so I've given 4 categories, I think 4, maybe 5, categories of arguments here. One is self-testimony. So, let's pretend there is no other archaeological artifact outside of the Bible. Only the Bible. And only from the nation of Israel. Nothing outside of the nation of Israel. Let's pretend that's the case. Now, the question that needs to be asked is still, how could this artifact have come into being? We're still not talking about one uniform block. It's not one guy showing up saying, oh, I've got 1,000 pounds. Which you may say, oh, I don't believe in you. You can say because it's just one guy. But if 1,000 guys come together and say, he has 1,000 pounds, then you need to take this carefully a bit more. Yep. Similarly, what I'm saying is the nation of Israel, the biblical account, is an official account of history given by an entire nation. If there were reasons to doubt it during the time of Moses, during the time of Joshua, during the time of later times and so on, why didn't any contrary opinions emerge at any point in time? Obviously, Israel Finkelstein isn't saying they were oppressed in Canaan to an extent people of contrary viewpoints can't put their points across. If they did, they'd be killed. If that kind of threat existed, I can understand. But obviously that's not what they're saying. They're talking about a free group of people, sometimes even a revolting people group, coming up in that way. So the point there would be, why would there be uniform attestation of an entire nation? Why would there be a group, a professional group called scribes emerging from this country? Why would the Levites not want any inheritance? If it's a completely made-up history, and made up Yahweh, made up Jerusalem temple, why should Levites say, oh, don't give me any land, just feed me, that will be sufficient? Why would the Levites say that? They obviously had prominence, a priest, an high priest coming up during the 1st century, so they could have easily stood up and said, wait a second, this is all made up stuff. Based on made up stuff, you are depriving me of land. You see what I'm saying? In other words, it's not a uniform one person giving testimony. It's a complex group of scribes, Levites, entire nation with all sorts of different views. This is where, the Sadducees and the Pharisees and so on come from Israel. The point is, Israel clearly is not a land where interesting ideas were just quenched. No one dare speak. That's not the kind of land Israel was. And we clearly see that. That's where the Sadducees came about, saying, oh, we don't believe in resurrection. Now, if free speech was not there, they wouldn't be around. We're not talking about Islamic history here. If you go away, we'll kill you. That's not clearly happening. And so we're clearly talking about people who could have raised up, challenged in multiple different ways. So, in other words, the point based on this would be a credible explanation of why this history came about, why a recognition of this history came about is something that needs to be answered. Just saying this is made up history is not sufficient. That's just satisfying a 2-year-old child. How was it made up? When it was made up, why didn't these people do anything? You should answer these questions. You should give comprehensive answers. Why is there no legend? Now, here's why I think people like Israel would see some of the supernatural events recorded as legends. And here's why I think, personally, he wouldn't know how legends really develop. Because he might have focused purely on Israel. I come from India, I know how legends develop from nations outside of India. All sorts of things randomly show up here and there. Something which was purely a brick one day earlier would suddenly become a god 2 days later. No one would question. Well, people would question. But the thing is, the people who take that seriously would still take that seriously. That's how legends develop. All sorts of embellishments all over the story. In the Bible, you don't see it. Like how we saw today, we have spent, if we deal with this topic module comprehensively, we're talking about months of learning, obviously. Of what? History. In other words, obviously, despite the fact that the Bible is a very spiritually significant book, there is plenty of hardcore secular history in it. And so no one dare claim it's all mythical or it's all legendary, because we have solid history here. Why? There is the practice of paying to redeem your firstborn. So some of these are maybe technical terms. If you don't catch it immediately, that's fine. Maybe we will follow during Q&A session and so on. Essentially, the thing is here, people really had to lose stuff. They wouldn't have had an incentive to take the story on board if it is a made-up story. They really were losing things. The question is, if people were losing, why would they lose to go with what they really know to be not accurate at their particular time point? I'm talking about people during Moses' time, Joshua's time, and so on. See what I'm saying? Clearly there should have been contrary opinions if that were the case, which we find none of, is the very important thing here. Costly. You need to pay with your own life in some cases. People are murdered for doing the wrong things. So the question is, who really were the beneficiaries if this story is not true? Secondly, corroborations. If it is a made-up story, if you come with any theory to explain the biblical narrative, we really need to then also talk about the fact that for the claims made in the Bible about history, we seem to have reasonable corroboration, including for that of Exodus and the Conquest and so on, like we saw earlier. Yeah? You might not agree, but they still match with what the Bible is talking about. So you need to now explain how that would be the case. Corroborations. Potential challenges. If you look at the storyline of the Bible, Samaritans were treated not as equals. The Assyrians were mocked. Their gods were mocked. The Babylonians were mocked. Their gods were mocked. People in Tyre were mocked. Their gods were mocked. Queen of Sheba was claimed to have traveled from a long time, and these are prominent people. Northern Israel, for example. The other important point is that the nation of Israel wasn't one nation. It became two nations. At times fighting with each other. There were hundreds of years where they were fighting with each other. But you find in the Bible, Judah to be prominent. The king, throne of David to be prominent. So why would the northern nation of Israel, which is actually the larger, after the Solomonic times, the more prosperous nation in various different ways? Why would they say, you know what, okay, you be the better guy, I'll be the lesser guy? Why would they do it? Especially after having been claimed to have become Samaritans. Why would they claim this? In other words, do you see the point? There are plenty of, even if you ignore people inside of Israel, individuals, plenty of nations which had power and ability to challenge the view of the Bible. The only challenge they bring in is, my God is better than your God. Not that you think I think you're making up your history. You're not really who you're claiming yourself to be. You see what I'm saying? But that didn't happen at all. And now, if you look at the storyline in the Bible, Israel gives ideas like, Abraham, Jacob, Isaac and Jacob never existed. They were really made up during the monarchic times. to just give an idea. For example, during the monarchy time, divided monarchy, you have the northern Israel, southern Judah. Someone really said, you know what, we need to combine us all, unite us all. So I'm going to invent Isaac and Jacob, who lived in north and south, and then Abraham, to link them both together. So we're going to say, we're next door neighbors, we're part of the same family, and so on. So in other words, Israel thinkers will point out to all the rosy stuff, to say, really Judah wanted to give a motivation, or Israel wanted to give a motivation to sort of muster together the nation. And that's why they did. They made things up in the book of Genesis about their origin and so on. Really? Have you read the entire book of Genesis? If you really want to make things up, can I please suggest to you a few things? You would never claim you took over the land of Canaan. Because Canaan will come and fight with you saying, it's my land. Why did you take my land? If you were making things up, you would say, this is my land. Not Canaan's land, but my land. You would never ever talk about Ammon and Moab. You would never talk about Edom. If you know about biblical, not the nation of Edom, but the individual Edom, which again, Israel, according to Israel thinkers, says just to make Edom as the bad guy. People have cooked up, made up the person of Edom. But if you go through the book of Genesis carefully, Edom was a reasonably good guy, better guy than Jacob. Jacob, in many regards, in a purely historical regard, Jacob was the deceiver. Edom was the guy who was deceived. Why would you call the guy who you want to make the enemy of your nation the better guy, the one who was deceived, the one who was the victim? Why would you do it? You would rather say, Edom is a bad guy, or he took several things from me, now you need to fight back. That's how you'd structure an argument together. This is reverse logic. This just wouldn't work. Foreigners in Canaan, dispossession of land. Oh yes, as I mentioned already. Foreigner in Egypt. So why do you talk about being slaves and suffering and so on in Egypt? What you want to do is muster an army together to go and fight. Just say that's what you want. Don't say we are weak and so on. And one of the other things, main, very, very important thing. If you want to muster an army together to fight against your enemies around you, the one thing you would never dare to do is say don't fight. Would you do that? You want to fight against your enemies, neighbors, they're fighting against you, you want to pull them together and so on. Would you ever say don't fight? Is that what you would say to muster them together? But go to the Old Testament. Be still and know. Oh, Jericho, you don't have to fight. Just take your fancy musical instruments, just go around. Is that how you would muster an army together? Or you don't need a large army, just 300 people, sufficient. Or these people bring water in this particular way, that's sufficient for me. Or one guy, two guys went around and did this. You have problems within you, and so on. Giving glory only to God. You really aren't heroes. You're zeros. You're nothing. Only God needs to be recognized. Is that how you would muster an army together, especially if you're making up history of that God? You know He doesn't exist. Would you say He's going to come and say, don't worry, just sit back, relax? Is that what you would say? You see what I'm saying? The storyline is contrary to what would have been a logically valid storyline if people like Israel thinkers has to be given any credence. So this idea of minimalist argument, I really can't see how they have made this thing up. Logically, it's backward. It's not just it doesn't work. It works in the opposite way. It's a negative impetus, which you would never do. On top of that, of course, we have the greatest testimony of the Old Testament, and that comes from our Lord and our Savior, King of Kings, from Jesus Himself. And that I present as a historical argument also, despite the fact that He is supernatural and might not be seen as part of secular history, for the pure reason that we are going to have sessions 3 and 4, where we are going to establish Jesus is rock solid history. His resurrection is rock solid history. No one dare challenge Him. And so when he says something, we can establish in sessions 3 and 4, we can establish you better listen to him. So when he says something, we take it seriously, even as a secular point. I think that point should be taught in universities, because this is a historically valid point. I'm not advancing some sort of a weird religious idea. I am advancing what is a historically valid point. Yeah? So just to summarize the argument so far, if you look at Jewish accounts, you need to understand that their account based on the fact that Levites are people sacrificing in all sorts of different ways to come up with the account that they come up with. It just doesn't add up unless it is history. Point number 2, on top of that we have extra biblical sources attesting not just the fact of, implicit fact of Israel would have challenged otherwise, but also the fact of the other artifacts attesting to the nation's history. Thirdly, no reliable contemporary challenge. Assyrians, Babylonians, northern Israel, Moabites, Ammonites, Philistines, no one really dared question. All they did was, these are people group of Yahweh. We see this is of a God, and they were fighting on a God-to-God basis. So they really took them seriously for who they were. And they had no other challenge except to say, maybe I might have a chance, my God might defeat you, sort of argument. Opponents had incentive to contradict the claims, but they never did that. So that's the summary of what we have. In other words, if we trace things back, post-divided kingdom, solid history, no qualms, no controversies, no arguments. Pre-divided kingdom, we have artifacts to support biblical account. The only reason that is not being considered carefully so far is because of a very flaky point about the name. And so things need to really be reconsidered there. That's 3. And 4 is, apart from that particular argument, the levels to which the minimalists and so on have gone are really entering into the land of myths, living in a fairy tale world, providing no evidence whatsoever, and giving no logical, presenting no logically coherent, meaningful context to claim what they claim, apart from making a very short-sighted argument. So that's the summary of what we have. Again, I was hoping to make up on time, but unfortunately we haven't.
Any questions?
Questions? 10-15 minutes, please.
Yeah, but your questions only.
While we are waiting for questions, maybe I'll just make, unless there's a question coming through, I just want to make one final point. Are there questions already or not? No questions. No questions, okay. So maybe while people are preparing the questions, one quick point. Remember earlier I said we were looking at secular history, not the supernatural signs and wonders. Apart from the comparison that talks about the signs and wonders in Egypt, if it matches with the 10 plagues. In regards to the remaining supernatural things recorded in the Old Testament, how do we deal with that? And there my point is, we need to categorize them into different things. And the main entry point for us who are living today to verify the veracity of the claims is to look at what are purported to be miracles that happen in a public arena, like the Red Sea splitting. Like, just view the storyline corresponding to them. Yeah, so Red Sea splitting, the 10 plagues as testified by Israel, the river Jordan splitting, fire from heaven during the time of Elijah, King Ahab, and so on. If you pull them all together, I'm not talking about the talking snake, because that's not a public event. I don't believe in the Bible Because suddenly I thought, talking snake is very credible. Because people use fallacious arguments to undermine the Bible. They come, oh, you believe in a talking snake. Well, wait a second. I believe in a God. And I can see the act of that God clearly in other very clear manifestations when I examine the context properly. Once I have established that that God is true, then I am willing to say, anything else he says, I am willing to go back. Who am I to question that? But that is after I establish that the existence of that God. And for that we need to take public miracles. Red Sea, 10 plagues, if you see what I mean, yeah? And most of which prominently happened at the origin of the nation of Israel. And the question that we need to ask is, if they did not happen, if they hadn't happened, and they were purely made up later on in Israel's history, suddenly out of the blue during King David's time or later, if that was the situation, the question we need to ask is, why did everyone know, why was there no one to challenge that? Israel is not a nation of fools. Israel is not a nation where free speech doesn't exist. Historically, people even spoke even against King David, let alone anyone else. Even King David, people, there was one particular way cursing him to his face while he was still king. That is the kind of nation the nation of Israel is, and that's why no wonder free speech wise, I don't know if you have observed the Jews, they say all sorts of things, free speech wise. They even say, oh, God doesn't exist and so on. Even without reading the Bible. That is the level of freedom the nation of Israel has had from God. I'm not talking about from other countries, but from God. So the point is, that being the case, if the events hadn't happened and they were later in production, the question we need to ask is, why is there no contrary account? How can someone say, are we saying suddenly today I'll say, Lord, let's team up together. I'll introduce a new religion. And we will say, God gave us cars or something. If we say something, there will be airplanes. Whatever, if you see what I mean. You would say, wait a second, I have stuff to do. Keep your idea to yourself, I have stuff to do. And then you move on. If you're independent thinkers and so on. That's the nation of Israel. Why did they all team up? Especially after the hierarchy of Samaritans and so on came in. So the point is, there is no logical explanation for these supernatural events recorded in the Bible, if not for the fact that they did happen at the times they were claimed to have happened and were written down and were testified by the people of that time through either explicitly or implicitly by raising no challenge against it. You see what I'm saying? So in other words, once we go through the natural, secular history, the rest of the supernatural history falls into place. Amen. Praise God. Question?
Well, a question from the family on the live stream?
No? No.
Everything is late.
I mean, there was one, but they are answering it.
The answer is
What's the question?
is it on topic?
Yeah, it is. I mean, you mentioned basically, Arul, that if the God of the Israelis was made up by Israel, why would the Levites accept no land as part of their inheritance and settle for just food and sustenance?
Yeah, it simply is inexplicable. It's foolish. Why would anyone do it? It's pretty much like someone coming to me and saying, please receive me as king and I will chop your hands off. Why would I do it? Why would I let that happen to me? If I'm gaining something for putting up with a lie, I might. I'm not saying I'm going to do it, but someone might. But to lose something to put up with nonsense, no one. Unless there is physical coercion, which didn't seem to be the case. Why would they do it? Anything else?
That's why somebody said that you've done a good job, so no questions.
Okay.
So, end of this.
Yes, anything from the floor here?
Just in addition to your lecture on David Roll,
Okay, yeah.
his book is A Test of Time.
Okay.
He bought that about 20 years ago when he first did this argument. And he did a BBC documentary as well.
Okay.
so they may be able to look up that BBC documentary.
Let me put it up on the chat, please.
Yeah, he'll be added soon. He's not yet part, but he'll be added soon. But in a couple of days, we'll get both him added and have the message from him conveyed. And we'll put that on the further reading section also, so it's all available for everyone. And that's the tragedy with David Rowe. The point is, he seems to have advanced things fairly on an academic level, which people have ignored for a while, and now the only recourse he has is to go to popular medium like YouTube, and they're making movies and so on. That's a tragedy. I do science. I'm an engineer, and I would say if I own a company, an engineering company, and if such a behavior happens, I remove people. I'd say, get away. You're not fit to do science. Just get away. Stay where you want to stay. If you can't listen to a contrary opinion, when it especially has credible evidence supporting, you really can't do science. You don't know how to do science. But that's what's happening. Many places we find politics, and this is tragedy. And I can say such academicians, if they come to industry where on a day-to-day basis their ideas should work, and if that doesn't happen, they'll be chucked out. They'll be gone out of business rather soon. The only reason they're still sticking around, surviving where they are surviving, is because they are in academia where you can say all that you want to say, companies could still fund you and so on, you just sit somewhere and write a few things. The more normal things are, the people who listen to you and so on. So this is the tragedy. Anyway, any other question? If not, we would close the session here. We're still behind by 15 minutes or so. So we're going to have a 15-minute break now. And then we start off with our New Testament. And hopefully we'd still be able to make up time. Okay, thank you very much. For those who are on live stream, both on Circle and Operations.